This is the second video on Hod and the archetype that finds itself expressed through Hod in the Tree of Life in Kabbalah, but also in a number of other traditions too. Now you remember we looked at Hermes Trismegistus, that's Hermes, Thoth, not pronounced that way, and who was the other one? The other one! Hermes, Thoth and Mercury. And then I also included Mikael, or Mikiel, depending on which tradition you're following, and Hanuman as well gets a mention in there. Now there's some other details that are just worth mentioning in order to try and build up this concept of how a particular archetype, now remember, archetypes are ineffable. They are essentially what people refer to as gods, but not the gods we can refer to, because they are above those gods. If you look in the Gnostic tradition, you have the god, and then the god behind the god. In alchemy, you have the sun, and the sun behind the sun. There's a lot of, you'll find this kind of theme recurring around various mystical traditions throughout the ancient world. And it's a nod to the ineffable. The most common representation of this is you have the god name, that we all know, and then there's the true name of the god. And ultimately the true name of the god is kept super secret. Anyone who knows the true name owns the god. They can become the god, they can destroy the god. So the true name of the god is a tradition that's kept very, very secret. Within the Bible, you have the Shem Ha-Mapharesh. It's not pronounced that way. Forgive me, all you Israeli people, I don't know. Shem Ha-Mapharesh, Shem-Mapharesh, I don't know. And it's the 72 name of God. This is what gave rise to the Bible codes. Now, it's a particular passage in the Bible, which is arranged in a particular way. And this gives you a whole sequence of letters. When arranged in the correct way and in a table, you end up with the 72 letter name of God. And that is how it's truly pronounced. When a human, a mere mortal, can learn to pronounce the true name of the Lord, the universe ends. Now that's often interpreted in two particular ways. Does the universe physically end? It's the end of the universe. Or does it mean your own experience of the universe is transformed? The universe in which you live is no longer the same anymore because you've reached that point of divinity. There's two ways it gets interpreted. However, you'll find in many magical texts and also Jewish-inspired texts, they never ever write the word God, G-O-D. They put G little line D, just in case somebody were to accidentally pronounce it correctly. And so it's quite a big thing in the Jewish tradition, but also in a lot of the Kabbalistic magical traditions that are inspired from the Jewish tradition as well. And so the true name of God is quite a big thing. Nothing to do with Hod whatsoever. I'm just really trying to get across the essence of an archetype. So when we talk about the magician archetype, or we talk about the trickster archetype, that's not the archetype. It is the archetype expressed through the trickster. It is the archetype expressed through the magician. However, because otherwise it gets really complicated and we have to keep explaining it every time, it's just easier to refer to these things as the trickster archetype, the magician archetype, and so on. So that's just a point of convenience, but that's not quite how it works. Anyway, just wanted to make that clear. For me, when I look at some other... Since I started all these years ago, and I started going a little bit more public with my esoteric type stuff, it's become a bit of a thing amongst many of the people from the NLP scene around me. And there's so many tarot people now from the NLP scene. There's so many archetype people now. And they reattribute. You'll know what they're doing because they're taking a lot of what I've done and reattributed it to other sources which haven't... dead people, basically. So they can cut me out of the loop. You'll know who they are because they refer to these things as archetypes. And they actually are not quite getting the archetype right. So just when you start looking at other, say, YouTube videos, there's lots of really good stuff out there, by the way. But just be aware that not everyone is fully understanding the concept that they seek to explain. So I want to introduce some other additional things that we can put into this little filing cabinet that we call Hod. And the first one I'm going to introduce you to is St. Christopher. Now, I just need to remind you, before we go into St. Christopher, I made a little thing here. This is just some of the key attributes we'll find within these embodiments of the archetype. Knowledge is very important, particularly knowledge of science, magic, astrology, and astronomy. Communication is key, and they're often a communicator between the gods and humans, or vice versa, or both ways. Linguistics and writing are very important. They're heavily involved with travel, lot of travelling about. They're very much a trickster. So some of the themes we will see is that of comedy, pranking, humour, and quickness of thought, the quick wit. That's the wings on the feet bit. It's a quick wit as well as quick knowledge. Now, for those who've ever seen those comedy panel shows, they're very popular here in the UK. Things like Whose Line Is It Anyway? And then we have various things such as Would I Lie to You? Which is, I've got to be honest, one of my favourite comedy things. They're essentially an excuse to bring some quick-witted individuals together to give them a platform by which they can be funny. And for many people, they can look scripted because it's so well done and people are so quick. Now, there is a degree of editing, admittedly, but a lot of the quick wit is actually true, it's genuine. How do they have that ability? Well, it's severalfold. One is they have a lot of knowledge. They know a lot of stuff. These people are people who study a lot of stuff. So they're clever. They're educated. They will all be people who write scripts. They write books. They write comedy routines. They're writing. They have a good knowledge of the written word as well as the spoken word. And more importantly, they will be practiced and rehearsed in comedy, pranks, humour, and so forth. All of that goes together to give them a quickness of wit. A lot of their stuff actually is built on a pre-existing set of routines they've already got. So, for example, those who have trained with me in IEMT will be aware that I know, having taught that workshop lots and lots of times, there's only so many objections that trainees can raise to me. And so, after a while, I run out of... I can't be surprised by questions that people ask me. I've heard them all 1,000 times before. Well, a few dozen times before. What I can do is I can write some of those key ones that I can guarantee people ask me. What if they're suicidal? That one? I can write that question on the board with an answer on it. So when somebody says, what if they're suicidal? And they're all angry, I go, that's a good question, that, because I was expecting you to ask that right now, and flip it over. Doesn't that make me look clever? But it's not because I'm clever, it's just because I have prior experience of that subject. That's what a lot of comedy and humour revolves around. A British comedian, Jimmy Carr, have a look on his YouTube stuff. Jimmy Carr dealing with hecklers, or just type in Jimmy Carr hecklers into YouTube. There's lots of heckle videos. And there's a guy also, I forget his first name now, Hofstadter, who does the heckle blog. And he specialises in dealing with hecklers. So his show largely now has become a thing where people go to heckle him. And he's absolutely so brilliant with his dealing with heckling, much like Jimmy Carr. I'll put links in the description so you can find them. They're worth looking at because what you'll start to see is a recurring theme. And so they're very quick-witted put-downs. When you see enough videos of them doing it, they've done them all a dozen times previously. So it's not quite what it seems, but it does come from lots of experience and lots of knowledge. So it's pre-existing. So it's not just, oh, isn't he quick-witted? He was born with it. That's not quite what's going on. So that's the trickster. We also have the psychopomp. And the psychopomp is somebody who escorts the dead. Escorts the dead into the underworld and keeps them there. They largely are a guide into the underworld. Now remember, the underworld is basically where the sun goes when we can't see it. It goes under the world. So it's a journey of light into the darkness, and then back out of the darkness again, back into the light. So we see night and day, light and dark, night and day, good and bad, and then all the mythologies that come with that. We also have some other things that are worth knowing. There was a time that electricity didn't exist, and you were largely dependent on candlelight in order to light your way. So at night time, it was very dark indeed. This led to two things. One is, on a clear night where there's little cloud cover, there's no light pollution. So stars would be a primary thing. Now, in winter time here, it starts to get dark at about 5:30. But because we start switching lights on, and we have street lights come on and all the rest of it, on a clear night, you don't see that many stars. Well, imagine if you don't have the internet, you can't read and write, you don't actually have much to do, you can't go and work in the fields, you can't actually do a lot of work that involves anything other than candlelight. What do you do overnight? So stars and stargazing and stories of the stars would have been a primary source of both entertainment, education and conversation, because they'd be much more apparent than they are to us today. People who live in cities where there's so much light pollution, they probably never see the stars. It can be quite a shock if you go out to somewhere like a desert or somewhere in the plains of South Africa, where I first saw an environment where there was zero light pollution, and oh my goodness, it is absolutely extraordinary what suddenly becomes apparent and what you can see. Never seen anything like that before in the UK. So stars and astronomy and astrology and the stories thereof would be quite significant to people. But there's this other element too. Nighttime, in olden days, before we had mastery of the environment, or even now destructive role of the environment, but before we had that, nighttime could be quite dangerous. We talk about keeping the wolf from the door. Wolves used to attack, wolves used to eat people, wolves were a major problem to people. If you go to parts of India, the big cats, tiger deaths is horrifying. Just the sheer number of people they get eaten by tigers. It's a major problem. Tigers don't necessarily attack at night, though. You can be taken pretty much any time of day or night. But wolves would predominantly attack at night, and so the fear of the woodland, the fear of the forest, the fear of the dark was real, because it was very, very dark. So it's not unreasonable that actually we have a distinct difference between the warmth and safety of the day and the danger of the darkness. And what else do we have apart from the sun, which is the source of all life? Itself journeys into the underworld. And you'll find that replicated through the Jesus mythology, or historical record, depending on your beliefs, and various others too, where essentially the king, the divinity, the god, itself dies or journeys through the underworld. And we find that very much with the Hermes Trismegistus trio, which is Hermes, get it this time, Hermes, Thoth, and Mercury. Right, so going around in all sorts of tangents here, so do forgive me. Now, let me go through some additional bits and pieces that are worth having just a little bit of insight into. Let's look at St. Christopher. Now, many people wear a little thing of St. Christopher around the neck. It's always in silver. It has to be in silver. Have you noticed that? St. Christopher has to be done in silver. It's quite important. He's the patron saint of travellers. And let me just give you, I've got to refer to my notes here. Let me just give you a little background on St. Christopher. In his day, he was actually known as Reprobus, or Reprobus, I don't know. And he was a Canaanite who was serving the king. So he was servant to the king. And one day he changed his mind about this king. He said, right, I want to serve not you, king. I want to serve the King of Kings, the biggest king there is to serve. And so he saw that the Canaanite king himself was scared of the devil. Well, if the king is scared of the devil, he can't be the King of Kings. There must be something bigger that isn't scared of the devil. So he went looking for the devil. And along the way, he found a wise man, probably a priest. And he learned from this wise man. This was on his traveling. On his travels, he learned the wise man. He said the devil feared Christ. The devil was afraid of Christ. Hurrah! And this was a hermit who was giving him this instruction. And he then instructed the hermit to tell him all about Christ. So now he's going to serve Christ, because if the king he's been serving is scared of the devil, and the devil is scared of Christ, then he must serve Christ. Oh, well, good. Now he's told, well, if you want to serve Christ, you've got to pray a lot, and you've got to starve yourself a lot. Praying and fasting is key here, and that way you can serve Christ. I don't think that's in the Bible, but that, maybe I got it wrong. Now, enter a difficult river crossing. There is a whole story around, essentially, there's two worlds, and there's a big river, and it's no bridges, and essentially people keep dying as they try and get across this river, because people have to wade across it, no bridges. And so it's a bit of a problem. Now we get to the bit of the story that's important, which is our St. Christopher, Reprobus, is huge. He's massive and he's big and strong. Big and strong is the theme of this video henceforth. And he starts to serve Christ by helping people across the river. And because he's big, he doesn't get swept away. He's sort of the one-man ferry, really, for them. Anyway, one day he's carrying this child, tiny little child, and the child feels like the weight of the whole world. And as St. Christopher Reprobus is trying to get across the river, he's struggling a bit because this child, he's only little, but my goodness, is he heavy. When he gets to the other side, he says, "My God, child, you nearly killed us both because you're so heavy." And at that point, the child goes, "Yeah, that's because I am the weight of the universe, because I'm Jesus Christ." And so he learns he has carried Jesus across the river. There we go. So he is both wanting to serve the Lord, serve Christ, the King of Kings. He carries him across the river from one place to another, and he also is going to be fighting the devil by serving the thing. Now, later on, he refuses to sacrifice to a pagan god, and basically he gets beheaded. That's it. That was the end of St. Christopher. So he now has the martyrdom because he refused to actually engage with the original Canaanite king, and so on. So he's now a martyr, hence why he's now a saint. Now, the figure of St. Christopher is that, did I say St. Michael? The figure of St. Christopher is that he's carrying a child on his shoulders. Carrying a child on his shoulders. Now, Jesus the child, you have Jesus the child, Jesus the adult, and then Jesus the resurrected. Right? There's your three, and they have very different traditions as to what flavour of Christianity people follow. Jesus as child is the lamb. He's the Lamb of God. He's the sacrificed one, right? And then later on he comes back as the Lion of Judah, or Jesus the Lion, to judge the earth. That's in Revelations. That's sort of the sequel to the story. And so the picture is largely of St. Christopher carrying Jesus the child, or Jesus the Lamb, on his shoulders. Key point, remember that moment. Right, so that's St. Christopher. We've got travel. He's big and strong, and he's traveling, he's conveying from one side across the river. There's other traditions where you have someone carrying you across the river, got to pay the ferryman, to the other side. I think there's a song here somewhere as well. Now let's just bring in Archangel Michael, or Michael, depending on which tradition you want to follow. Now he's the messenger between the people and God. He's a herald. You know, hark the herald angels sing. I'm not going to try. Hark the herald angels sing. The herald angels are those that are basically official messengers. So official messenger. He's the herald. Now what does he do in Revelations? He fights the armies of Satan. What does Archangel Michael have quality-wise? He's big and he is strong. Michael means he who is like God, and it's largely referring to strength as opposed to cosmetic appearance. So it's like basically, guess what? He's big and strong. Now we come to, let's have a quick look at Hermes. So we have Hermes God. He guides the souls to the afterlife. He is also a messenger, but guess what he's also known as? He's the Good Shepherd. Really, really is. And Hermes is often depicted as carrying a lost lamb on his shoulders. Just thought I'd mention it. And what is Hermes also? Guess what? He's big and strong too. So he's the Good Shepherd, carries a lamb on his shoulders. He has superhuman strength and stamina. He's also very quick-witted and has all of those other things that we've looked at in the previous video. He's also heavily connected with the underworld. He's connected with the underworld. He also has criminal tendencies because he's the trickster who's the thief. He's also the god of thieves and so on. The underworld thief, blah, blah, blah. So you'll find a little bit of a thread going out into how the underworld is carried today and how we refer to that. So connected to the underworld, he's the psychopomp, and he also has some criminal tendencies. Just thought I'd mention it. And he's big and strong, carrying a lamb on his shoulder. Now we come to Thoth. It's not pronounced that. Tahuti, more realistic, not really pronounced that way. Now he is also in the underworld. His thing, though, is he's very much weighing the souls or the heart of the dead against the feather, which is Mart, the Egyptian god. And of course, Thoth, it represents all communication, knowledge, all that kind of stuff, learning. Thoth is frequently represented as a feather in his form as messenger and scribe of the gods, but he's also very commonly represented as a baboon. He's a monkey, which of course then connects us to Hanuman. Now Hanuman is the Hindu monkey god, who is also the trickster, etc., etc. He's a prankster. When he was a kid, he pranked a holy man, didn't like it very much. Holy man went, "Psh, you're cursed now. I remove all your magical powers," because his pranks were getting a little bit too far. Another key thing that happened to Hanuman when he was a child, or baby monkey, he flew up to the sun, tried to bite it because he thought it was a biscuit or something, and in doing so, he was struck down by one of the other gods. And was struck down by a thunderbolt that hit him on the jaw, which broke his jaw, and he fell to earth dead. So now we have another god who dies, and then basically he's brought back. Lots of saga. He's then resurrected and brought back to life. Not after 3 days, though. So there's the death and resurrection, and he's got a funny jaw. And he also is known for his superhuman strength, quick wit, and all of these other qualities too. Now, he's both resurrected and he's a prankster who has all his powers removed from him, including his strength and ability to fly, until he and a whole bunch of buddies, they're up against, they're on a bit of a journey. They're going, having a bit of a trip, bit of a holiday, and they come to the edge of a massive ocean. And they can't get across the ocean. There's no way to cross it. But it's okay, because one of the holy men knows the story that he used to have superhuman powers, and he had it taken away from him by a curse, and now he can lift the curse. And now Hanuman remembers his magical powers, and guess what? He can go across that huge, great expanse to the other land, where he arrives at the city, which is a city of devils. And there he finds Sita, and makes himself a little tiny ant and crawls around so no one can spot him. And there's a little chat with Sita to say, well, what's happening here? She says, oh, I'm betrothed to this arsehole. Don't want to marry him. He says, oh, don't you worry. Guess what? Come with me. Off we go. Conveying people across from one side to the other. So we have lots and lots of stuff that all connects up in multiple different ways. They have completely different stories. They have completely different morality tales attributed to them, or moral principles being taught. They offer all sorts of things that are culturally specific, that are culturally bound. But when we start to have a look, you start to see some of the archetypal expressions being expressed in all of these stories, despite the stories themselves actually not being the same story. But there are some very powerful commonalities, if we filter it well enough. Because what we can start to find, of course, as well, is the whole death and resurrection scene. So we can start to filter a whole bunch of stories, which may well be the same ones, to connect to Tiphereth, which I'll do next, which is basically, it's the sun, it's life, it is the expression of life, but is also the sphere of the sacrificed gods, or the dead and resurrected gods, of which there's loads of them. And I'll start to look at that in the next set of videos. Now, what you're going to find, of course, is the same story has multiple archetypes expressed through it. And that's why it's a mistake to say the Hermes archetype. It's not. Hermes is an expression of this set of archetypes that particularly come in here, but there's also other archetypes in there too. It's not like one thing is one archetype or one archetype is one thing. It's not how it works. So I think that's all I'm going to do for this particular video. If you have any additional points, anything I've missed on this collection of stories, do please stick them in the comment section. If you have any questions on archetypes, anything you'd want me to cover, do also stick those in the comment section, because that basically helps me shape the next video. And even though this is in the member section, do please click that like button, because I do think it might still help with the YouTube algorithm, even though it's not going out to the YouTube masses. Just do it anyway, that would be great, and I do appreciate it. And of course, thank you for watching this far and for being a subscriber to my channel.